Hello, my name is Andrew Morgan Smith, and I'm here on the Radium Records channel to go over the string and horn arrangements for the track All My Love that Bradley Denniston just released. I worked on all the string parts and arrangement for this, and I had a blast, and let me show you what I did. To start out, Bradley hit me up, and whenever he sends me stuff, there's usually a rough arrangement. He always tells me, hey, if there's something else that you think is a better idea, or you have an idea about something, throw it at me and see what you think. And in this case, it's a little bit of a mixture of the two. So let me play you this little intro here, and you can hear what the intro sounds like. I'm going to push my parts up a little bit more. So what we have going on here is twofold. So first we have the saxophone parts. Whenever we first got the track together, he has this cool trumpet flute part that has and then he has this response back that was on the synthesizer going and he decided, hey, what if we try and double that rather than try to play to the sample? So this is what we ended up having with the saxophones. This is all me recording it. So what we end up having a lot on these soul records is you get a lot of unisons, and then at the very end they break out into some chord. So we kind of have that a little bit, but it's more of like this is just some light like thirds and stuff on these. A good mix of unison with some harmonies. And then at the very end we get this like stacked pyramid of sound here. So you go from bari sax, tenor 2, tenor 1. Right? And it creates this stacked chord. On the string side, a lot of these old records are recorded in small studios, right? It's not some huge orchestra in there. It's, you know, a small 10 to 15 piece group. So whenever I was working on this, I had the idea of using cinematic studio strings, and I'm using the spot mics and the main mics on these, on the section sound. And from here, I'm creating like the ensemble sound on these. So you kind of can hear the sound that we get on that with these. And I like using the tremolos on a lot of these samples. It gives it a nice air of the studio sound. It just sounds more real, sounds like it has more energy, especially as we're starting out this intro. And then the other thing that happens in the studio is you get the front players, the stronger players, or the players just closer to the mics are just so much louder a lot of times. So I also went in here with the cinematic studio solo strings, and I did the same thing, and I just double those. So this is just the solo mics on this. And that just gives this much more present sound. Here is the ensemble with the soloists together. And it does a couple things. It gives us that small studio vibe, which is cool. But also, it makes it feel a little more independent. You'll notice that a lot of my samples are not quantized. They're not like hardcore quantized to the grid. I play most of these in, and the reason why I do that is because it just feels more real. And so if you have slightly different automation settings between the violin 1 here and violin 2 here and violin, and viola and cello, then everything starts to feel more like there's an ensemble of people here, not just a keyboard patch playing things, because too much of our pop tracks end up sounding super tight to the grid to the point where they don't sound like real players playing and having small little timing issues in there. So moving forward, a lot of times in songs I like to do like some kind of big intro where we kind of get an idea of what sonically we're going to be doing in the track, and then throughout the rest of the track we kind of build towards the end chorus. This track isn't really different from that. We're about to go into the final verse on the track, and I have a little taste of what's to come using string contours from Strezov sampling made by a friend of mine named Robin Berner. So this is a library that does like just swells. So it'll do swells like up a bar, down a bar, up 2 bars, down 2 bars, up 2 bars, down 1 bar, up 1 bar, down 2 bars. And they just sound so real. You don't really have to program them because they're automatically doing these swells. And the cool thing about this library specifically is you can go between chords. So you can play an F chord and then go to a C chord in the middle of the crescendo, and it'll change to that chord and do the swell from that point in that chord. So it makes changing chords really easy and just sounds really fluid. So here's that in just, this doesn't have any automation on it. Here's that in context with the track. Just immediately sounds real, immediately sounds great in context of the track, just sounds live because it has that air to it. It's an actual recording of string players doing that motion. So the next challenge that I had on this track was Bradley had sent me this middle section, which I'll play a portion of for you, but it didn't really have a whole lot in it. It was just kind of this like pause, tranquil vibe going before we go back into the main track. So it kind of sounded like this. And he knew, though he needed something there, he had kind of said, hey, whatever you think works, like if you have an idea, shoot it my way. So going back to string contours, there's a thing called Luray bowing. So Luray bowing is basically a string player will take their bow and they put it on their string and they just kind of do a very fluid back and forth. They don't do any kind of rearticulation other than just kind of like going back on the bow. And so here is what ended up doing some section playing of the soloists in that. So the section players, this is the solo violin, solo cello, another solo violin, and then also I did a little bit of the doubling with the section, the soloist for the cinematic studio players. Here's what it sounds like. So it just has this nice flowing quality to it, and here it is in context. It just sounds great. It just sounds solid without any other work, Now we come to the last build in this track. We come to the last big section, which is just the chorus. So Bradley had sent me over some MIDI. So this is the MIDI he had sent me over for the wind players. So, it's unison stuff, unison. Then we go to chords, which is like pretty old school. And then we go back over here, back to unison again. And so for me, I had the thought of like, okay, here's the parts I'm going to re-record. I'm going to do some inner voices with the tenor. And what else can I add to it? Here's the saxophone stuff. So here's the saxophone parts that we were just listening to that are just recorded. But then I did this with the strings. So here are the string parts filling in all those harmonies a bit. So we get the violas playing and the cello playing in the middle, moving around a little bit more. So let's take a listen to those parts filling everything in. So that's the horns coming in with that in the middle. And then whenever he originally sent me this track, there was still vocals throughout the whole back end. So it became a question of, well, we know we want something on the back end. We don't want the vocals again. So he pulled the vocals out, and we just need some other motion and some other interest going on. So here was what we came up with. Just something that has some thirds, some fifths, some other harmonies going on. So here's that section with everybody in, well, without the main track. So orchestrationally, we got the thirds going on this stuff, and it sounds great. Doing the similar thing we were doing earlier, where we're having inner voices move around, so cello and violas are moving around, basses are just playing the root. And then as we get over here, we get to violins and octaves. And the cool thing about the violins and octaves is that they just kind of soar above everything, and they really cut through because they have the top note and it's supported by that bottom note, and it just sounds so much better. Here's that back end in context with everything. And now if I go to delivery for Bradley, I try to be as flexible as possible. So I'm sending him my violin 1 stem, my violin solo 1 stem, my violin 2 ensemble stem, the violin 2 solo stem. So that way he can mix and match whatever he wants and get whatever volume levels he wants. I'm not even really processing anything. Nothing is tuned. Nothing is really fine tuned. So that way he can have as blank a slate as he can with the parts and as not colored as possible. Also, jumping back to recording saxophone. So whenever I record sax in my office, I'm usually using a large diaphragm condenser like this. This is a Flea 49, but you don't need something like this. Any large diaphragm condenser will work. I always point it down the bell of the saxophone, so that way it's like almost like a flashlight being pointed down the bell of the saxophone. So that way you're getting the best possible tone all the way across the spectrum, and any large diaphragm condenser will do for this. Some are better than others. And I think that's pretty much it.